Hey everybody, my name is Derek Peterson. I'm the president of Hope Holdings. In this video, I want to talk about the First Amendment, where it came from, how it came to be, why it came to be, and how it relates to us today, and especially in the digital world, especially as it relates to social networking. So first, let's read the First Amendment, which is something that people don't seem to be doing. I don't think anybody has. I mean, it seems to me that most people have never read it or thought about it. They just spout out. If you talk about First Amendment, they just say free speech, right? Somehow the concepts of the First Amendment have been morphed into or been reduced to, the short free speech, okay, which has come to mean I can say whatever I want to say, whenever I want to say it, wherever I want to say it, and you can't stop me or you shouldn't be able to stop me because what I have to say is really, really important. Everybody should listen to me, right? That was never the original intent of the First Amendment. So let's read it. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, semicolon, okay? And then you have, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, okay, semicolon, okay? So next sentence, next thought, okay? Or the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So you can see there's basically two main points to the First Amendment, separated by a semicolon. The second one here doesn't really pertain to what we're going to be talking about today. I'll read it again. Or the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this relates more to like a peaceful protest or filing some complaint with the government without having to fear, repercussions. Okay. Kind of goes along with what we're talking about, but not really. The main thing what we're talking about here is this first part of the First Amendment, this first point, which is, again, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, semicolon, okay? And then they add in there, just to clarify, to say, okay, don't forget about these. These are included in what we're saying here, right? Or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, okay? So they threw those in there to highlight, to say, okay, don't forget these. These are included too, okay? But the main point here is this concept of establishment of a religion, okay? The Congress shall not make a law respecting an establishment of religion. You have to remember here, right, back in early American times, 12 of the 13 colonies had state-sponsored churches. So they're basically like theocracies. So they would tax you to fund this church, right? Even if you didn't believe in what they believed in. And they would punish you if you didn't believe like this church, or at least not give you certain privileges as a result of your beliefs, okay? So this was a big deal, this concept of establishing a religion. A religion, by the way, doesn't have to mean something spiritual. It can just mean any set of beliefs is a religion, okay? So any belief systems, they didn't want the government setting up belief systems and then forcing them on you, okay? And that's what this whole First Amendment was meant to protect, the government establishing a religion or setting up a belief system over you, okay? Which would then prohibit your freedom of speech and freedom of press, obviously, right? If you're being punished, there's lots of other ways they could punish you, but those are just two vivid examples of things that you would do that might come into question when you're in a state situation or in a government situation where they're enforcing their belief systems on you, okay? So, like I said, 12 of the 13 colonies practiced this form of tyranny, these theocracies, these state-run churches, okay? So let's look at the one that didn't, right? Which is, to me, is the most important one, the most interesting one, right? And the one from which we get this whole concept of the First Amendment, right? So Rhode Island was founded by a man named Roger Williams. I'll just give you a really, really quick, I'm going to plow through this history. It's something I've spent a lot of time studying. I could do hours on this subject. It's fascinating to me. It's the most important part of any history in the world, I think, because the First Amendment is that important. And this is where it comes from, honestly. So Roger Williams was a Puritan minister from England. He came to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he was a very well-known, well-respected preacher and theologian. He's a genius guy. He spoke like 12 languages, but he translated the Bible into the Native Americans' languages and actually made a whole dictionary concordance. But anyway, he started preaching a doctrine there called post-conversion baptism. So meaning you get baptized after you become a Christian, after you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, you would then get baptized. That was totally against all of the colonies, really. They were all Protestant or Catholic at the time. So they all pretty much practiced infant baptism, right? Which would be baptizing you into the church and also into the state, because they were kind of one and the same, right? So he said that's wrong. You shouldn't get baptized until after you're a Christian, okay? That made him what's called a Baptist, right? Which comes from the term Anabaptist, ana meaning re. So they're rebaptizers, right? They're not really rebaptizers because you're not really baptized when you're an infant. But anyway, so he started getting persecuted for this belief within Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they're threatening him and things, and he's going to be deported back to England or killed, right? These guys don't play around back then, right? Again, I could tell a whole bunch of histories here of really sad, disgusting persecutions that took place, even within these colonies that were established because they were escaping religious persecution themselves. And what do? They come here, set up shop in their own colony, and then start persecuting people that disagree with them, right? Which is pretty standard operating procedure for people that don't really get free speech in this concept of soul liberty, right? They want free speech for themselves, but nobody else. So Roger Williams had to flee because he was going to get, whatever. So he bolted off into the wilderness. The Indians took him in. He would have died for sure that winter. He had some health issues that winter, and it was a very brutal winter. And they took him in. He ended up buying a piece of property in what's now known as Providence, Rhode Island, and from the Indians, who he had befriended for years. He was very close relationships with these folks, very close. And some of his best friends, he said, were these Native Americans. And they really respected each other. And so he set up shop in this town named this town Providence. And they set up a community basically that was based on this concept of this Baptist concept of soul liberty, meaning that each individual has a right to their own beliefs and no government should be able to impose a belief system upon them, right? They're not like sovereign citizen type of people that don't believe in any laws or rules or regulation at all, but they didn't believe the government had a right to force any belief systems on you as far as religion goes, or any kind of belief system, really, moral type things, right? Which could all be construed as religion, right? Again, so people started moving there from all over, right? It was the first Jewish synagogue was set up there. The Jews were getting persecuted in various places. They came to Rhode Island. It's the very first Jewish synagogue in all of America was set up in Providence. The Quakers were this group, this religious sect that were a little odd, honestly. They would fall down in the middle of church services and then start shaking around like Quake. That's why they're called Quakers. And so, which is kind of funny, but Massachusetts Bay Colony didn't think it was funny, and they're hanging these people, right? And so they all flee to Providence, right? And where they can escape this religious persecution. Real quick history: Providence, Rhode Island. John Clark went over there actually with Roger Williams later, and they actually, long story short, they got granted a charter declaring Rhode Island a sovereign country, and actually got the king to state that the property of Rhode Island was this was Providence, Massachusetts Bay Colony, or Providence plantations, but they were actually said that the property was initially rightfully the property owned by the Native Americans, right? England had never done that. England was previously, every time they moved discovered someplace where other people lived, would claim they own everything, right? But here they actually said Native Americans owned it, and they sold it to Roger and Company, and then those guys actually paid England also for the properties. They paid for it twice. They were declared a sovereign country. They were basically their own nation, represented, and enacted in this charter, and that the king ratified. So it's an amazing thing that happened. Only by the grace of God did that thing happen. And so they set up shop there, and Roger Williams started writing books. I'm going to read here a quote from him. But he was really the father. This whole concept of free speech, of soul liberty, came from Roger Williams and the Baptists. Okay. A lot of people want to secularize these things. These concepts that we're talking about as it relates to free speech and soul liberty, the First Amendment, came from a group of people known as the Baptists. It was a Baptist distinctive, this concept. It was the first, Baptists had been persecuted by Catholics, Protestants, everybody for centuries. And finally, by the grace of God, were able to establish their own government, right? Which their principles could be enacted. And those principles are what won the battle of thoughts, right? And you remember in these early colonies, right? You have like these different colonies with all different ideas, battling for ideas, like an incubator with a bunch of different companies battling for who's the right idea in this competition for ideas. And the Baptist won, okay? And they won doctrinally across the board, right? How many people believe now you have to get baptized in order to be a Christian, except for Catholics and other cults, right? This concept of soul liberty, free speech is ingrained in all of us as Americans, right? It never existed up until this point. This whole concept of a soul liberty was never even dreamt up in any government before this time, before Rhode Island. If you want to understand free speech, you want to understand the First Amendment, you have got to read Roger Williams. Otherwise, you're just a moron shouting free speech, okay? That's a simple fact. Like it or lump it. You don't like Christianity, you don't like God, well then, whatever. You're still not going to know what you're talking about when it comes to the First Amendment, because that's where it came from. All right, so quick from Roger Williams. He wrote a lot of stuff. This is the persecution, the bloody tenet of persecution for cause of conscience. Great read, very short. He wrote a bunch of really important stuff, as did a lot of other Baptist folks on this subject of soul liberty. So this one point, eighthly, God requireth not in uniformity of religion to be enacted and enforced in any civil state, which enforced uniformity sooner or later is the greatest occasion of civil war, ravishing of conscience, persecution of Christ Jesus and his servants, and of the hypocrisy and destruction of millions of souls. Okay. So what he's saying is you can't force a uniformity of religion, a uniformity of beliefs in any civil state. Okay. Civil states should be civil and not religious, not have any principles. Okay. Here's another point. And holding and enforce uniformity in any civil state. I'm just going to read all of these. You know what? Let's do it. No one's going to read this unless I read it. Sorry. First, the blood of so many hundreds, thousands of souls, Protestants and Baptists, spilt in the wars of present and former ages for their respective consciences is not required nor accepted by Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. Secondly, pregnant scriptures and arguments are throughout the work proposed against the doctrine of persecution for cause of conscience. Thirdly, satisfactory answers are given to scriptures and objections produced by Mr. Calvin, Beza, Mr. Cotton, and the ministers of New England churches and others, former and latter, tending to prove the doctrine of persecution for cause of conscience. I'm not going to break these down. They're very interesting. I'm going to do a whole video on these later, actually, on these persecution of cause of conscience. But fourthly, the doctrine of persecution for cause of conscience is proved guilty of all the blood of the souls crying for vengeance under the altar. Persecution for cause of conscience basically means you're being persecuted for what you believe your conscience dictates. Okay. Fifthly, all civil states, with their officers of justices in their respective constitutions and administrations, are proved essentially civil and therefore not judges, governors, or defenders of the spiritual or Christian state and worship. Sixthly, it is the will and command of God that since the coming of his Son, Lord Jesus, a permission of the most paganish, Jewish, Turkish, meaning Muslim, or anti-Christian consciences and worships be granted to all men in all nations and countries. And they are only to be fought against with that sword, which is only in soul matters able to conquer. To wit, the sword of God's Spirit, the word of God. Basically meaning you don't force people to believe your religion. All these other people do, don't get me wrong, they certainly do, but we don't, okay, as true believers. Seventhly, the state and land of Israel, the kings and the people thereof, in peace and war, is proof figurative and ceremonial, and no pattern nor precedent for any kingdom or civil state in the world to follow. Okay, a lot of people are trying to use Old Testament stuff to enforce, moral laws and things like that. Didn't apply to this modern time. I don't want to use the word dispensation. Eighthly, God requireth not an uniformity of religion to be enacted and enforced in any civil state, which enforced uniformity sooner or later is the greatest occasion of civil war, ravishing of conscience, persecution of Christ Jesus and his servants, and of the hypocrisy and destruction of millions of souls. Ninthly, in holding and enforce uniformity of religion in a civil state, we must necessarily disclaim our desires and hopes of the Jews' conversion to Christ. Jews need to get saved. Tenthly, an enforced uniformity of religion throughout a nation or civil state confounds the civil and religious, denies the principles of Christianity and civility, and that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. 11thly, the permission of other consciences and worships than a state professeth only can, according to God, procure a firm and lasting peace. Good assurance being taken according to the wisdom of the civil state for uniformity of civil disobedience from all sorts. 12thly, lastly, true civility and Christianity may both flourish in a state or kingdom, notwithstanding the permission of diverse and contrary consciences, either of Jew or Gentile. So you can see that he was a very Christian man, right? These concepts that we're talking about are very connected to the Bible and to Christianity. You read Paine, you read Jefferson, you read these others, right? What they did is they took these early writings of Roger Williams, right, the founder of free speech in America, and they secularized them, watered them down, and published them as their own, right? They are direct. You can read Paine. There's direct plagiarisms. I mean, 100% plagiarisms of ideas from Roger Williams, and they just secularized them. They diluted them. It's still better than nothing. It's still better than anyone else has ever had, but they're not as good as what they should have been. Okay, but it's still better than nothing. Okay, so again, this is the First Amendment. This is the whole concept of the First Amendment. It is not free speech. The whole concept is a government establishing a set of beliefs over you. That's the thing I really want to push through to everybody, right? That's the thing that's really important here that everybody needs to remember. A government with its own belief systems forcing those beliefs on you, okay? Like they're doing with gay marriage, like they're doing with all these other ideas, okay? These moral things that the government does, they force on you. We have a bunch of very immoral people running the government, right? It's not a good situation to have very immoral people forcing their morals on you, okay? And that was the whole purpose of this of the First Amendment was to protect us from these things, right? From the government enforcing their belief systems on us, okay? That's the thing we want to avoid. That's the whole principle, okay? So now that's where the First Amendment comes from and why it came to be and what it's meant to be. So now let's refute some of these arguments that are being made by folks as excuses, as reasons to do the exact opposite as it relates to social networking, and people's beliefs online and the way they operate, okay, with their own businesses. So I don't mean to pick on anybody here, right? But these guys have made themselves very, very public on this matter, and they're just beating the drum over and over and over again. Everywhere I look on social media or anywhere else, it's these guys in your face all day long, right? And so I'm going to pick on them, right? And they're very wrong, and they're teaching things that are very wrong, I don't understand what their motivations are. I don't want to assume motives here, but let's just say that they're wrong, okay? So Robert Barnes is an attorney for Alex Jones, who's a well-known radio talk show host, and he's representing Alex in some case against him saying something about some kids in a school shooting, right? But he's also become a spokesperson for him on all these matters of censorship, where Alex is getting banned from some of these social networks, or all these social networks, right? I don't even want to get into whether they were right or wrong, these bannings, right? I just want to stick it to the principles. I don't want to get down in the weeds, but I mean, you know, if somebody wants to ban somebody from a social net, my basic idea is if somebody wants to ban somebody from a social network, right, they have a right to do it. Okay, it's their business. They can do it any way they want to do it, right? Their bottom line should be finances. Okay, if the government wasn't giving these companies money, then they would have to worry about bottom lines, and they would focus on doing what's right because they would be focused on making a profit. Okay, that's the real motivator. When they're getting money from the government and they don't have to worry about actual real business operations and expenses, then it distorts everything, right? And it makes it a very difficult market to self-correct, okay, to be in, okay? But these guys are calling, Robert Barnes and Alex Jones are calling for the government to step in and regulate these social networks. Let's just focus on Twitter today. Each of them is a little bit different, a little nuanced. If you get into some of the big tech companies like Google or Amazon, it's a whole different can of worms there as far as monopoly go. So let's just focus on Twitter exclusively today, because that's the one they're mostly talking about right now for some reason. Because it's the one all the people that are into politics like. But really, people are getting banned much worse, censored much worse on Facebook and other places on much more important topics like health topics and things like that on Facebook and things. But anyway, so what they're calling for is they're saying basically that the government should step in and force Twitter to allow these voices that they don't want to have on their platform, whatever reason, right? And the main, and they're literally, it's frustrating to me because they're sitting there arguing for what they call free speech, right? Saying that they should have a voice and have a right to say stuff, but they don't have any dissenting voices on InfoWars. I mean, it's the same thing every day, all day. They get the same people saying, government step in, Trump, quick, do something. Please help us, Trump. Censor these guys. They're being mean to us, right? Alex Jones has millions and millions of dollars, right? He hasn't done anything to support me or any, I have a couple other friends at Alt Tech. He hasn't done anything to support them, right? He has millions of dollars. He could build his own platform in a couple of months, right? And I mean, I don't understand what's going on with these folks, why they're doing this, but it's just I'm just going to pretend like they're sincere and just wrong, okay? So, but anyway, every day they have these voices on there saying, censor big tech, they're monopolies. It's not right. It's a public square. Over and over and over again, right? I caught this clip the other day they had from this guest on InfoWars, right? This guy, right? So I get this Muslim guy who's running this Robert Barnes is helping set up some newspaper or something, right? So we got this Muslim guy with a British accent, right? Telling us, who's raised a Muslim, right? I guess now he says he's an atheist, right? Telling us what the First Amendment should be and what Trump should do with the First Amendment, right? This guy's probably never even read the First Amendment, right? I mean, and he's saying how he's annoyed by these libertarian boomers, and and I'm just like, I'm annoyed by Muslims explaining to me what the First Amendment is, okay? Not a single Muslim in this world has ever believed in freedom of speech, okay? Not a single solitary one. Most Christians don't, right? But not a single Muslim ever has, okay? Not a single atheist understands what freedom of speech is. Not a single one. And most Europeans don't have the foggiest idea of what real free speech is or what the First Amendment is. It's not their fault. They were raised in cultures. They have their own worldviews. They just can't get it. So the thing I'm annoyed by is some Muslim dude with a British accent telling me what the First Amendment is and telling Trump what he should do to big tech. What you should do is, anyway, whatever. Shut up, kid. Okay? Little dweeb. All right, so the main argument, so I don't understand why Robert Barnes is tied to guys like this, right? It's very suspicious to me, okay, that we have these voices being pushed on us as the leaders in this free speech, you know, push, okay, so-called free speech, was the exact opposite of free speech, right? I'm going to prove that in a second here. But it's actually, I believe, an attempt to undermine free speech, to undermine the First Amendment, and to create these social monopolies as as national utilities, right? Where it's all over at that point, okay? And that's what they're pushing for. So the two main arguments that they're using right now to push this agenda of big tech regulation, which would, make no mistake about it, if the government steps in and says, big tech, you have to allow this speech on your website, right, on your platform, okay, then you have to allow this speech in order to be considered a platform on your platform, then they're going to say, hey, they're going to say, okay, if you must, we accept, don't throw me in the briar patch, please. And they're going to accept it. And they're going to say, oh, our advertisers are jumping ship, going other places because they don't like the content on here anymore. They don't like these users on here. So they're not paying us any more advertising. It's your fault, government. And then so the government, they're going to be too big to fail. So the government's going to say, okay, we'll step in and we'll pay you money and make up the difference for you, right? And then they're nationalized. This is a backdoor attempt. Alex Jones, etc., were all calling for these companies being declared utilities previously, right? I think they kind of got beat up on that idea. So I think this is their second backstage, this less direct approach at the same thing, okay? And it's just like professional wrestling. You got big tech, social networks saying, they want to be called the utility because they're all going out of business in the next couple of years. I explained in another video, right? These guys are doomed, right? Playing in this new world right now with this new tech that's being developed and these new options that are coming out. These guys are done for and they know it. Their only chance to be declared a utility. So they want to be declared a utility, okay? Don't make no mistake about it. That's their dream, okay? And then you got Alex Jones that wants them to be declared a utility. So they're just pretending to fight with each other, right? And to me, it's all just professional wrestling, staged. Both want the same outcome, kind of like with our political system. So, if that's what's going to happen. If once the government starts forcing these platforms to allow this or allow that, they're going to cry. They're going to cry foul, cry poor, and the government's going to step in. They become utilities. Okay, which again is a total nightmare because they're still going to be censored. It's going to be our platform. It's going to be some kind of a ghetto that we're forced into that we'll never be able to get out of again, and nobody's going to be able to compete with them because it's taxpayer money funding the whole thing, right? And it's still going to be moderated and censored by the government. So basically, what these guys are doing is they're asking the government to create a religion over us, right? Their belief systems imposed upon us. Please, government, please impose a religion over us, impose a belief system over us. The exact opposite of the intent of the First Amendment. Okay, and so two of the ways they've shifted now, right? Instead of the direct approach, nationalize them. So now they're using these two excuses, right? So the first one is this Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Basically, what it is this concept of platform versus publisher, right? So a platform would be like a library, right? A distributor, like a library or a newsstand or something like that. So, a library can't be responsible, or a newsstand can't be responsible for every word that's printed there, right? So you can't sue a library because of something somebody said in a book, right? You can't sue a newsstand because somebody put something in a newspaper. But you can sue a newspaper, that's on a shelf in the newsstand for some for some defamation or whatever, right? Or false statements or whatever, right? There's, you have direct repercussions to the publisher, right? So a publisher is responsible for the content that's put into their publication, right? Whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, a book, or a post or whatever, right? They're responsible for it, okay? A platform isn't, okay? What these guys are trying to do, right? What Barnes is trying to push through, and Alex Jones now, is they're saying, hey, once you censor us, hey, all bets are off. Now you're a publisher because you moderated content on there. And so now you're a publisher. Now we can sue you, right? Now you're suable, right? You lose your protection, you lose your immunity, right? That is one of the most disgusting attempts to undermine free speech in the First Amendment I've ever heard in my entire life. Okay, it's absolutely disgusting. It would be impossible for any internet company, any data company, anybody, any social network, right, to be able to do that. And they've already done this. Okay, make no mistake, they've already done this, and he knows it. They've already gone after websites that wanted to have family-friendly content, Christian content. So they started moderating content that they didn't agree with as far as their family-friendly terms, and then they get sued for something else that was on the website that maybe I don't know what the exact case was, but they got sued and lost, right? Because they were declared a publisher. Because once they started moderating this other content, then they get declared a publisher, which of course is going to be subjective, especially against Christians, right? And so they declared them a publisher because they started moderating things. Okay. And that's what these guys are trying to do. It would be impossible for any small guy to be able to operate like that. You have to see every single post, right? And because you could potentially be sued for every post everybody makes on your website. So if I want to moderate porn and some other things on a website, then all of a sudden they could declare me a publisher and sue me for every time someone calls someone a name. I could get sued like I'm the one who called the person the name, right? And that's what these idiots are calling for, right? It's a backdoor attempt because they know perfectly well the only way anybody would be able to have a social network is unless they're a government entity, and and protect it. And that's what they're trying to do, right? So that's the first thing. That's their one backhanded attempt to undermine free speech. Okay. Second thing is that he keeps talking about, this attorney keeps talking about, is this case. Whenever you hear an attorney talking about case law, right, on guard, right? Be careful, okay? Because especially when you're talking about constitutional matters, because they're setting you up, okay? All that matters when you're talking about the only thing that should matter here when we're talking about the First Amendment is original intent, okay? Not what some scumbag lawyer and attorneys, judge thinks about something, right? There's judges and lawyers that got laws passed to murder babies before they're born, after they're born, right? That got homosexuals can be married now. Who cares about case law? Let's focus on original intent. You never hear him talk about original intent. You hear him cite case law, case law, case law. When they're citing case law and not original intent, you know they're lying and you know they're trying to trick you, okay? And this is a stupid analogy anyway that they're making. What it is, this Marsh versus Alabama, what it was basically, is this town that was owned by a company. And this lady was handing out religious pamphlets in this city-owned town, right? Company-owned town. And then, they told her, hey, we don't want you handing that out. And she sued him and she won, okay? So what he's doing basically is he's trying to compare this town that's owned by a company to Twitter, right? Which is just making that case in a court would get laughed at so far. It's ridiculous because it doesn't even there'd be so many holes in that analogy. It'd be laughable, right? It's a stupid point to make, right? And, you're in a town, every street, every park, everywhere you go is owned by the town, okay? But you're inside America with the First Amendment, okay? Versus, let's look at Twitter statistics, okay? Twitter they claim to reach about 15% of America, okay? And I think that's a 1-year active user. So you could probably, and that's what they're claiming. Let me tell you, social networks lie. I've proven this. There's some alt tech socials that lie by a factor of like 10,000, literally. So take their actual number, multiply it times 10,000, and that's what they claim to have for users, right? So take what they claim, divide it by 10,000, and that's their actual user count, right? It's like not even realistic. Now, of course, big tech can't lie to that degree because they would get busted and embarrassed in a second because it would be about 20 times more people that ever lived on the planet. But they still lie by a factor of 2 or 3 all the time, right? So pretty much any number you hear, divided by 2, divided by 3, and that's probably closer to reality. So they're claiming 15% of U.S. population over the course of like a year. So, on a weekly basis, that's probably less than half of that, right? So anyway, the reality is probably 5 or 6% of the U.S. population uses Twitter. Okay. Now, all the politicians do, all the celebrities do. So everybody thinks everybody uses it. But most people don't use Twitter. Twitter is one of the least used social networks there is, right? It's ridiculous to compare Twitter and a company you can either go to or not go to that has less than 5% of the people that have actually chosen to go there on a regular basis, right? When they could easily just type in another address and go to another site or create their own website on the internet. To compare that scenario to an entire town that's owned by a company is ridiculous. It's just dumb, right? It's laughable excuse, right? So, again, it's an attempt to try to make these companies bigger than they really are. I mean, again, Twitter could fall. I did a whole video on this. Twitter is nothing. These companies are all smoke and mirrors. Okay, these things can fall. This is the internet. They can fall in a day. I've had companies that fell in a day when I was a cocky dumb kid, right? That I should have sold and I didn't because I thought I was cool. Believe me, these things can fall just like that, okay? And they're not that important. They're incredibly not important. And with the technology that's coming out, these things are going to die natural deaths within the next 12 to 24 months, okay? Everyone's just going into a panic, going into the 2020 election. And so they're going to give up our First Amendment because they're a little bit nervous they're not going to win the election or something. We're going to be fine. A lot of us are developing tech to take care of it, right? Lawyers just stick to telling the truth and focusing on the First Amendment and protecting us from the, people really attacking the First Amendment. And the people that build things will take care of the rest. Okay. You guys, lawyers and the writers, especially the Muslims with British accents, shut up, stay out of it. Let us build stuff. And you just whine over in the corner. Okay. And pretend like you're smart and important. Okay. Leave us alone while we're doing stuff. Thanks. All right. Next point. Quick point I want to make that really annoys me is this. Alex Jones, ironically, Robert Barnes is defending here, trying to differentiate between, the Christian Baker is different than big tech. And he's trying to cite some reasons here why. Alex Jones, his client, has repeatedly said that this Christian Baker, what happened here, the background is there was this baker in Colorado, right? I think it's Lakewood, Colorado or something. Who made wedding cakes. This homosexual couple came in and wanted to make a cake and decorate it for them. They intentionally targeted this Christian baker because they wanted to rub it in his face that he's a Christian and didn't want to do it. And they knew they could sue him, and they're scumbags, right? And so they drive by a bunch of other bakeries, come there, to mess with the guy, right? And he says, no, I can't make that cake. You're happy to buy a cake off the shelf, but I'm not going to design a cake that promotes your, homosexual marriage. And so then they sued him. And so Robert Barnes here is defending this baker. Alex Jones, however, has repeatedly said, and I'm still waiting for him to recant. Until he does, he's a piece of garbage in my mind, right? Hypocrite and a piece of garbage, okay? He repeatedly said that this Christian baker should be forced to design this cake for this homosexual couple, right? So I have no respect for Alex Jones at all until he recants of that. I never will again. Okay. It's a disgusting, total opposite of free speech. And I'm doing a whole video on this. I'm going to do a whole video on this later on. That's going to get pretty ugly. Okay. I'm pissed about that. Okay. So let's just read through these dumb points here real quick. Difference between the baker and big tech. The baker doesn't offer a public service, inviting political speech on his platform. I did a search for bakeries in Lakewood. I think there's like less than a half a dozen or so. So technically, the baker has a bigger monopoly on wedding cakes in Lakewood than Twitter does on social network, right? So there's they have like a 20%, but there's no options for bakers, right? You're stuck right there unless you want to order something online. So you got like 5 other ones, I guess, to choose from or something, in your town. So, that's like 20%, Um, anyway, um, so yeah, the baker does provide a public service, actually, right? He makes wedding cakes. Um, and he doesn't not invite political speech. Politicians are free to come in and they can make a cake for some political thing, right? I don't understand the point of that either. Baker doesn't have any special federal immunity from suit for anything he publishes. Yeah, he does. It's called the First Amendment. You guys should read it and focus on that, okay, instead of case law. The baker doesn't have a monopoly on the public square. Like I said, he has a bigger monopoly than Twitter does, apparently. Twitter only has about 5% monopoly, and this baker has, probably 20%, I guess, in his city of 150, 200,000 folks. So anyway, the whole point I want to make here is that I don't believe it's a wise move to regulate big tech because it's going to be used against us. If you regulate big tech, they're going to cry foul. They're going to say, government, we're not making any money now. You have to support us. It's your fault. And they're going to be nationalized. And then we're going to have these utilities, these social networking utilities over us. For whatever reason, I really believe that's what these people want to have happen. I don't understand it. I don't understand Alex Jones's push to have universal speech forced everywhere, but I don't like it. It's the exact opposite of the intent of the First Amendment, if you actually read it. One more time. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay? If you're asking the government to create a utility, a public forum, and then moderate it and censor it, then with their ideas and their belief systems, and we all have to participate there, whether we like it or not, then you're begging them to set up a religion over us, okay? And that's the exact opposite of the intent of the First Amendment. So I'm going to make some examples here in the next few weeks of what the real intent is of the First Amendment with some of our own web properties as it relates to Alex Jones and some others who don't seem to really care about the original intent of the First Amendment or about other people's idea of free speech and defending their soul liberty. So again, I'm Derek Peterson. Thanks for listening. Sorry, I was kind of long-winded there. It's late at night, and I'm super pissed off after reading all these tweets and listening to these videos. So I thought I would just make a video. But again, please read Roger Williams. Focus on the real point of free speech. Don't just let people make up a new definition of the First Amendment, of this concept of soul liberty, of this concept of establishing a religion over us, right? You have to look at these things in context. Be principled, be brave. Don't get afraid. We're not going to do this or do that. So you have to make these moves that undermine everything that was established for us and fought for 400 years now and longer than that. Really, before these principles, were being fought for long before that. People were murdered over this concept of soul liberty and free speech. People were burned at the stake all over the place. Baptists were murdered for these principles. Okay, this isn't a joke. This is very important stuff, and without it, America is just Saudi Arabia, right? Or China. Without it, we're nothing. This First Amendment is what sets America different, makes America different. Okay, Second Amendment protects the First Amendment, as we all know, right? But without this First Amendment, without the original intent of the First Amendment in place, we're doomed. The world is doomed. America's doomed. The whole world is doomed. So don't let Alex Jones, don't let Robert Barnes, don't let these other Muslims from England and Europe and these other goofballs trick us into believing something that our founding fathers were trying to protect us from. Trick us into going along with something our founding fathers were trying to protect us from. So again, thanks for listening. I'm Derek Peterson from Hope Holdings.